Hello, everyone. Just checking, and we are live now, I believe. Just prepare everything. All right, so hello, everyone, and welcome to this presentation, which is about how to communicate with clients from a developer's perspective. And we all love this topic, right? Everyone here probably should be familiar with some stories about clients and how our clients are amazing and they communicate very clearly, and us poor developers need to understand them. And it's basically the world, the life without clients would be much, much better, right? Just a reminder, this is the sixth talk of the 7-day conference called Rails Architect Conference. And this is the sixth talk, the last one. So thank you for being with us, those of you who were on most of them or some of them. This is all happening thanks to Rails Architect Masterclass, which today we close the sale, so depending on your time zone, but like whatever is the last day of any time zone for today, like the last hour, we are closing the sale. So if you want to apply for Rails Architect Masterclass, that's probably the right moment to do so. Okay, now back to the presentation. So I believe there are two biggest problems in the dev world. And those are not the typical ones that people say, like off-by-one errors or caching or something. Those are funny, but I believe there are bigger problems than that. And it's clients and code in general. What I mean by that is that we are basically a function as developers. We have this function called develop, and we take client as an input. Maybe it's some kind of client communication, and then we return code. We are a black box. We are a pure function. For all of you who are functionally oriented, you should feel satisfied because we are functions. However, the problem with this, and this is the funny part of it, is that we are actually bad at accepting the input and we return ugly output. So even though we are a function, we actually fail at our only job. Not all of us, I'm simplifying a little bit, so don't feel offended here. It's just I want to stress the situation that maybe we are not perfect. And me in 2004, because I started my development career somewhere in around 2000, and for the first years of my career, I enjoyed blaming the clients. So I would say stuff like, it's all clients' fault, right? We developers, we did the right thing, but it's all clients' fault. The communication problems are clients' fault, obviously. Like we developers, we hear what they are saying, we do what they want, and then we go back with the code, with the result, and they say this is wrong. So clearly, who's the one to blame? Obviously the clients, right? And which is more funny, we also say that the messy code is client's fault too. How is it happening? Like, how do we rationalize it? Well, obviously, they keep changing their mind, so we have to keep changing the code, and we are in such a hurry because they always want to have the change now, that in the end, it's a mess. So again, a client's fault, right? Some companies, some teams, they try to solve the problem with adding new layers of communication, which is absurd to me, to be honest, but I see this everywhere. Like on their own, the idea of project managers or user experience specialists, obviously they're great, like it's good to have specialists, but they shouldn't replace the communication channels. And I see it in many companies that you have this kind of situation. So remember, by the way, the client is very rarely the actual user of the product. So we are already confused with the communication. Like the clients can be wrong because the user actually wants to have something different, and the users, they sometimes also don't know what they want. So now we can have a user, client, some kind of proxies, maybe project managers, then maybe even a lead developer or lead architect or someone, and then there is the last developer, the poor developer. And on their own, the proxies, again, they are okay if they don't serve as a proxy, but more like, they help us defining the requirements, but it's more like a help, and developers should be involved in all the communication channels possible. This is the hardest problem to me in the development world. Like very often, the client will say, yes, of course, you can talk to all the people involved, but in practice, it's just, don't waste your time. We know what you should do, so just spend your time writing code. So now, fast forward, me in 2020, so more or less today, the beautiful year of 2020, like what kind of surprises we have waiting for us. Now I'm wondering, What if it's we who are wrong, right? What maybe it's the developers. Maybe, I'm not sure. Let's see where we go with that. So we say stuff like, I said stuff like this. The clients, they sometimes call it this, for example, a product. And then sometimes they call it that, for example, item. So sometimes it's a product, sometimes it's an item, and we are confused. Like there should be one name for this stuff, right? Why they should make their minds. But the truth is, you can have an object for each of them, and that's me in 2020 realizing that it's possible to do so. We can just keep them in different modules. So in one part of the system, the name product makes sense, while in the others part of the system, maybe it's called inventory, we can think about this as items. It's more generic. So actually the business, they were right. They are right in such ways. So when they communicate their vocabulary to us, maybe we can assume more, like at least that's my lesson, that they are more right, instead of claiming, hey, you just call it differently, you're wrong, it doesn't compile, I'm the compiler, you're wrong. Yeah, so they change their mind too often. That's what I was saying. But now I know, because I also run a business now, that's the reality of business, because that's the reality of life. Things change frequently, and it will never change. Like with developers, I was in such camp to believe that one day the clients will make their minds, and we will create this stable, deterministic system where things don't change ever, because everything just works, and we can test it. We can look at this beautiful code, clean code, and everything will be great. But that's the reality of business. It will be changing all the time, because life is changing. The problem is, again, with us developers, I believe, or it was my problem in the past, because I would have one object model, or actually, in case of Rails developers, that would be one data model, because in Rails everything comes from the database and is basically almost one-to-one mapped to objects. So in all those kind of framework related projects or framework infected projects, so everywhere, Python, Django, Java, Spring, actually it's less about frameworks, it's more about the data access layer. So more like Ruby Active Record, Java is probably Hibernate or whatever Spring has integrated with, Python is whatever they have. What was the thing? I don't remember. Whatever Django uses, right? Or any other framework. So this is kind of infecting us into think that we should have one model for the whole applications, all nicely connected. Everything is exactly in one place. That's why we have a problem to put two different names on the same thing, right? Because we have just one thing to represent what in the business minds is two different things. For them, a product in e-commerce is something different than product in inventory or product in magazines, right? So it's an item inventory in the inventory world. So those are two different names for the same stuff. So we can call them products in both places, but they are different models. You should build a different model, different abstraction for separate departments. For those of you who were here on Tuesday, my first talk of this conference, you probably know I'm sounding familiar to what I was saying there. So I will not repeat too much from that talk, but for those of you who were not there, please go to railsarchitects.com/conference, and you will see the recording of that talk and how I'm suggesting to put departments around specific modules of code, or actually modules around departments. Another thing is that this is causing lots of stress and lots of miscommunication when the clients, they want a change, and they say, we request a change to the system in whatever formal or informal way they do it. They want to change, for example, one report, but quite, let's say, significantly. So they need to reorder the report, so it's almost the kind of associations between the data is much different. And again, we build this one model for everything, including the one model for the views and one model for the business logic. So it's one model. So when we want to change, when we want to adjust to the new needs of this report, we kind of change stuff which also other parts of the system rely on. And now we are in a problem, because They expected a change in one area, the clients, and they see it as like that's their mental model. They see it as something different in the code base, but then they look at other parts of the system and they see that there are bugs in other parts, and they don't expect that. As developers, we don't expect that too, but it was like very much connected to each other. It was very hard to detect that we introduced this change in one place and now it's happening in other places. So the solution for us at the coding level, at the architectural level, is to have a module per each view in your app, and you will have isolated changes. We call them read models in CQRS. That's something you might be familiar with, but that solves exactly this problem. And that's the difference between me in 2004, already slightly experienced in IT, and me in 2020, where I now know that I can do it as different models. Even more, I should do it this way, because the changes per each view, per each report, they will happen. And if I have those reports isolated, even to the level of having their own database, or their own storage, they can be the same database, but just don't look at each other's storages. I will be able to solve such problems easily and without stress. And in 2004, I wasn't familiar with this technique, so it was me being wrong because I just lacked some architectural skills, or actually not even mention such big words like architecture. It's just I lacked some developer skills. And when the clients, when they see that we are when they see that we are changing one area in their perspective, but then we're breaking some other areas, their trust goes down. And this is very often the main root of the problems of communication. When you stop trusting someone, but you are kind of forced to work with them because their contract obliged them, or there are some other reasons, like they really have no one to switch to and they rely on your team. But it's no longer the same. So very often in the projects, you will see, a good chemistry between the client and developers at the beginning of the project, like the first 3 months, 6 months, maybe 1 year, maybe 2 years. But then over time, when things are breaking here and there, and it feels like they feel that we are not under control, we are not controlling our software that we wrote, and we can try to blame everyone, but in the end, it's very hard to rationalize why it's not our fault, right? And even if the client doesn't play the blame game, because that's very often very cool and great that they don't play the blame game, that you will feel that they will kind of like micromanage you. So please just change this part, but never touch the other parts. That will be their communication language. There are no easy solutions for such problems. I've mentioned some of them at the architectural level. You can have the modules per department. You can have a module with their own storage per report or per view in the application, whatever the users see. So when you change at one part without touching the others. This requires some kind of coordination of those loosely connected modules via events. So we are talking about event-driven architectures here, but it still doesn't solve all the problems. It's just, slightly maybe improving the situation. And even now in 2020, I still fail at client communication. I still sometimes have, unfortunately, those situations where I misunderstand the client or I losing the trust of the client. So I'm not saying that there are solutions to everything, but here is how I try. So I will share some techniques with you, how I try. So I mentioned events already. So communicating with business via events is something that I do over the last, 5 or 6 years. This is working surprisingly well in some cases, not in all of them. The idea is called event storming. Maybe you've heard of that. It's the idea, usually when you Google event storming, you will see pictures of people putting post-it notes on the walls. And it's usually developers together with the business people. So they stand in front of the same wall and they are discussing and they are putting some events. Events like, for example, so on Tuesday talk, I've had this example of restaurant application. And the restaurant applications had those events like guest entered restaurant. So if you're building a restaurant application and you're you're doing the event storming session, the big picture event storming session, you would put some kind of events like that on the wall, just to have it clearly visible that this is part of the business flow of the restaurant, and this is part of the system that is built in order to automate and support the restaurant or the managers. So you'd have events like guest entered the restaurant, guest sat on the table, guest was presented with menu, and then guest confirmed order, and then there was guest paid, for example. So this kind of events, those are abstract sentences or abstract words that you can use to communicate with the business. And if you put it visually in front of them, they will understand from left to right in the chronological order. So you can discuss it, visualize it to them at a better situation than in the code base, right? But those are becoming things in the code base as well. So those are events, and they will become objects, or they will become data structures, whatever you choose. They will represent what has changed. So guest paid would probably have like guest ID and the amount that was paid, or maybe guest ID, order ID, and the amount, something like that, or just guest ID and order ID, and that would be from the context, what was the amount. Maybe it will include the tip, depending on the countries and so on. Probably this means that from that session with events, you would have an object called guest somewhere, and they would have a method enter restaurant to reflect the vocabulary of the client. We are assuming this is the vocabulary of the client. I'm not claiming this would be the one, but this is the way how we are mapping the events to the code base. So you would have a guest.pay, and guest.pay sounds like a different department. It sounds like payment, while this sounds more like, I don't know what, probably sales, but more marketing, where we are just about to present the guest with an offer. That will be marketing, so maybe marketing, or we just call it the dining room apartment, and that should be fine as well. There are two rules which can help here. So Sherlock Holmes, I already kind of mentioned it. So if you have a guest paid, what happened before? Before they were eating the dishes, before they were presented with the menu, and so on. So we are going back in time to detect more events. So that's Sherlock Holmes rule. The Fantastic Four technique, it's where you say, for example, guest paid, but 0% of that event is that they didn't actually pay. So this technique helps a lot in representing the situations in the code base that we would usually skip those. So what happened when the order was confirmed, the dishes were eaten, but the guest paid event never happened? Like, what happens in our code base in such situations? Like, how do we deal with that? Did they escape? Did the waiter forget to confirm? Like, something has happened, and this is part of our business scenarios. We need to catch this. 50% event. What if the guests, they paid only 50% of the amount? For whatever reason, they said it wasn't really good quality, so they will not pay for the full amount, right? 100% is okay, it's like just guest paid. And 150% is a situation where they paid for some reason, instead of $100, they paid $150. And it wasn't really a tip. So again, what does your code base, what's your system doing when it happens, right? We should be able to always detect those 4 scenarios, where one is the successful one, and the 3 others are the failure scenarios, or some kind of weird scenarios. The next technique is impact mapping. And impact mapping is about us developers thinking in business goals, actually everyone. So I forgot to prepare the book, but let me get it. It's probably not professional to disappear from the presentation, but impact mapping is a book and also a whole framework of thinking by Gojko Adzic. I attended his workshop in 2016 in Budapest, I believe, and that was really good decision in my business life to attend this workshop. The book is actually very short, and if you go to impactmapping.org, I believe lots of this information is there, probably almost everything. This changed my mind, and that was already during my transition to be more conscious business person as well as a developer, because I found a technique also for my business and also for me as a developer. What I mean by that is that as developers, we should understand what is the business about, the vocabulary, the business processes, but also the business goals. And it sounds like obvious, everyone would agree with that, But when we go more specific and we say, I've used that example from this book, we need to convert 1,000 more freemium users to paid users. So that's a business goal. Someone said that this is the business goal, someone probably from the board. And when we try to think about that, what can developers do about that? What is actually, so developers should be presented with such business goals, and then they should be creative, and they should like connect the dots in their system. And even them, they should be coming with ideas what we can do. So obviously we would have marketing people working on that, we would have sales people working on that, but developers can also do something about that. So depending on the application, they can look at the code base, or they can look at the architecture, or they can look at the modules and think, okay, what can we do to have to convert 1,000 more people from freemium to paid, and at what cost? So maybe we make the price cheaper, and that's it. We have big numbers in the system, like thousands of people are coming. So if we reduce the price, that's okay. Maybe it's whole comes down to a marketing campaign where the marketing people just send a mailing and they say, if you convert today, you will have the first 3 months free, something like that. So we sacrifice on something, but when we receive something. But maybe there are some areas in the code or areas in the business processes that we are presenting where we can simplify or enforce that the paid users can do, well, the freemium users will be able to do less. So maybe the whole process manager or the process, the business process, which is implemented in our code base, now could be reduced. You need to become a paid user before you make an order in the application, or you create some kind of presentation, like let's say it's a presentation tool. So you can create slides, but you can never run them. You can never play them, for example. You can never export them. So that would be a change that will require the developers working like developers work. But the important part of impact mapping is trivial. It's just is this fact that we should work together on specific business goals, together with marketing, with sales, with other people involved, and think, okay, if we need to convert 1,000 more people within a month, let's say, what are the business hypotheses here? So maybe the marketing says, we'll run the campaign, and I think thanks to our mailing campaign, we can get 100 people to convert. We still have 900 to come. So then the salespeople say, we will call all the sales departments, well, all the departments of our users, and we will try to convince them to use. So maybe they know there are 5 salesmen, they're able to call like 600 people. There are still 300 or 200 people left, right? And for some reason we need 1,000. So we need to generate, and then the developers come and they say, okay, we can, or the user experience people, they say we need to change the UI, and then the developers can say we can change the whole business process being implemented, and that would help as well. Which changes the way I started thinking about backlog. I used to think about backlog as something that is presented to me to be done, and I want to finish off all those things in the backlog. My goal is to get into the direction of an empty backlog, right? This is our goal of the developers. Because we assume that the world is static, and one day we will get to the bottom of the backlog and everything is finished. The reality is different, and it's very rare, and it's more common that the backlog is growing. Never mind like how much faster you are as a developer, as a team of developers, the velocity is fantastic. The frequency at which the things in the backlog can appear is much bigger, and not without even mentioning bugs, right? It's only about the tickets in the backlog. And it's only when I learned about impact mapping that I started thinking differently about backlog. I started thinking about backlog less as an organized or ordered collection of tickets, but more as an inspiration for the business goals. So, okay, we are presented with this business goal, and we have like 500 of tickets in the backlog, which was always scary to developers and they hate it. But now we can go back to this backlog and we can review or somehow filter the backlog by roles and by impact. So I started looking at the backlog not as something I should make empty as soon as possible, but something I should be able to filter quickly. So I'm trying to find those tickets where it was defined that the freemium users, that they impact freemium users. So freemium user is a role here, and whatever impact. And now I can go through those tickets which are impacting the freemium users, and I can think, okay, is there any potential in this ticket or something similar like this ticket to to make people convert more. And suddenly, the bigger backlog we have, and the best, like Trello is good enough usually for that, with labels and colors and such. The bigger the backlog, the better for us, because suddenly we are just looking, we're just researching. Okay, we probably came up with this idea somewhere, or someone came with this idea. They put it in the backlog. Now we can find it, and now we know it's helping us in the business goal, because it's very difficult to remind yourself about all the ideas that were before. And if you do it like this, suddenly the business, they trust you. They trust that when they put stuff in the backlog via themselves or via some proxies, they trust that they doesn't disappear, first of all, and they trust in your creative process that you will find it and that you will use it for their business goals. And the idea of putting things in the backlog is also the idea that that the business trusts us that things don't disappear. So the business will tell you very often, like, one day we want this and this report, and you add it to the backlog, and you describe whatever you understand from their vocabulary. You put the vocabulary in the ticket for this report, and then you forget about it. But then you label it somehow. So you say a report, oh, that's for the accounting people, right? Because that's clearly for them. So you put a label accounting, and then you put a label helps them in something, right? So whatever the report is helping to making some decisions. So you can put some labels or some tags or whatever your backlog tool allows. And then you are able to retrieve it. And one month later or 3 months later, when the business comes to you with this problem, you say, well, we know about this report you mentioned some time ago, and now you're gaining trust instead of losing trust. And my final thought for this presentation is a bit crazy, and I'm even worried whether to present it, because it's hard to present this idea without some misunderstanding. So do my best, but I will start with something strong. What if we let the developers lead? So what I mean by that is a bit reverse the situation. In almost every project I took part in, and there is this concept of the business driving what is being done. It's either the business or the proxies. But you can see my evolution, like what I learned. I learned about event storming. I learned about impact mapping. I learned about many techniques, like, for example, domain safari, where, for example, when I was working on accounting software, I actually took an online class in accounting, not accounting for developers, just a really normal accounting class, and I learned about accounting, not perfectly, so I couldn't do accounting. Actually, I hate accounting, but I was able to understand most of the vocabulary because I learned the vocabulary. So this is just another technique. I call it domain safari. I explained it in the Rails Architect masterclass as well. So we put a lot of emphasis on this in our masterclass on this idea of retrieving the knowledge somehow. For example, when there are situations where the business, the domain experts, they are not available for you. But you can see that all of those techniques, they have something in common. They have this in common, that it's developers gaining the business knowledge. Then so the event storming is an idea where the developers gain some new business knowledge. The impact mapping, the developers learn about business goals. So what if we go one step further? Given that as developers, and I'm obviously assuming senior developers or maybe some more experienced developers, I'm simplifying the world a little bit. That's the good world I live in, because at Arkansas, we only have senior developers. Everyone is more than 10 years experience. So that's the world I live in. I know it's not everyone's world, but I'm now in the situation that I see developers gaining business knowledge, and I can see that the next step is possible. I'm not saying we are doing that yet, but I'm saying that if we are, as developers, good at writing the code, putting the code well in the boxes, right? So the bounded context, so the modules per departments, the read models, the communication is happening via events which are defined together with the business. The business goals are presented to us frequently. So after several months, we are becoming almost like experts. We can predict what are the business goals next iteration. So after all of this happens, can we take the lead as developers? Would it be a good idea? And how would that look like in practice? Because even if you do event storming, even if you do impact mapping, you are still left with the problem of legacy code, of technical debt, of things not having enough test coverage. So as developers, we see the products from behind, from below, while the business people, they see it from the top, and they don't see the problems. We are constantly telling them the problems, like, well, in normal situation it would be easy to do, but now we have to clean this code a little bit. So it's really unfortunate timing for this feature to appear, because we're totally not ready for that. Luckily, we have this technique called preparatory refactoring, so please wait 2 months and then we will be able to develop this. The business, they don't accept it usually. But if we go one step further, again, I don't believe this solves like all the problems, but maybe that's the direction we should go. If we accept all the previous techniques, that sounds like a natural direction. Let me know in the comments if this sounds crazy. So we can take the lead. We know what are the business goals, more or less. So we have a number of business goals. And now we can either come up with new business goals, that's probably the hardest level, or we can just take as an input the business goals. And now, because we are the ones knowing what's the shape of the system, and if they have business goals and the business goals are somehow described like this, achieving this business goal means that we will have $1 million more in the budget for the company. So if you understand this, and we know this business goal is 1 million, this one is probably 3 million, they're hypotheses, they're not really usually exact numbers. The business really doesn't know usually about the future that much, but they can predict like this business goal is twice as good as this one. So they can somehow qualify that. And if we know this, then we can look at the code base, kind of put the business goals on top of the code base, and we can look at which areas are possible to do with the easiest ones and which areas require some cleaning of the code base before we start on them. So let's wait with them. So we could be the ones making the order of business goals appearing. What it means in practice, I believe, or I suppose, how can it look like in practice? It's probably like a developer's dream. So it's a developer dream in that manner that maybe we could do what many of us are dreaming about. Let's just clean the code base, just simplify the code base. But given the input, the business goals as the input, we know that, hey, I'm almost here where if I clean just those two classes, or I extract a new department, a new module, a new bounded context, I will be able to very easily do this specific business goal. So this might sound like a developer utopia, maybe it is, but I believe that there's something in here. There's something where we can, if we can be trusted, and if we learn about the domain, and the domain itself is not enough. The business is about how to make money on top of the domain. So we need to understand what is the domain about, like let's say accounting, and then we need to know how the money is really made. So how to find people who need the accounting software. And once we know it and we know the code base, we are the ones who know everything, and we are the ones to make the best decisions. Otherwise, if we reverse the situation, the business people constantly need to query the developers. They constantly need to ask, right? And if you reverse the process, it's almost like a better object model. Instead of saying, hey, can we do this business goals? We will say as developers, hey, the business goal will be in 2 months. This business goals will be in 1 month. So that's probably sounds like a good control flow. I have a comment. Tom says, this sounds great and very much the direction I've been moving to. Wow, so thank you. That's the first public confirmation from someone that I'm not crazy about this idea. Because I think this is the first time I actually shared this idea with anyone publicly on the presentation. Maybe someone else invented this already, and I'm just repeating. But to my best knowledge, I didn't see anyone saying that. But maybe. So we can discuss it later. To summarize, we talked about representing the clients and users' vocabulary in the code. So the departments, the reports. When they say it's product, put it as a product. If they say it's an item, it's a sign for you that there's a different department probably. We need to have many models instead of one. This is the biggest sin that Rails developers make. We create one beautiful model for everything, has many, belongs to, and we try to say the job is done, but it's actually representing just one, and probably not the best the best model. So this is the biggest sin we can have. But I'm saying this all again after learning about domain-driven design and the idea of bounded context. more than 10 years, I've had no idea it's possible. So I kept running in the circle to find what is the right model, but the actual truth was there are more models than one. Talk events to business. Somehow, surprisingly, it works. I also like the idea of talking objects to business, but functional people can say that they like talking function to business. I was successful talking objects to business, so explain to them how it works using the events or using the objects, and use some heuristics like the Sherlock Holmes rule. So go back in time, what other event would need to be possible. So there's this concept is called event storming. There is a recent one which is appearing as a new variation of event storming, I would say, or maybe it's not a good summarize of them, but there's a concept of event modeling which is worth trying, and I'm trying to learn how they look at this. So while event storming is more like brainstorming, let's put everything on the table or on the wall, event modeling is from the beginning oriented towards remote collaboration, and event modeling is more about let's talk about the happy path first, and then so they look about those series of events more like slices. They call it slices. And this sounds good to me, but I need to be more. I need to put more time into learning what event modeling is about, because maybe I'm just guessing. Then, so talking events to business, then business goals, impact mapping, and impact mapping as the concept of let's have the business goals and let's everyone work together, marketing, sales, developers, and find out what we can do to achieve those business goals. And the crazy idea of developers leading, I don't know how to call it, but for now, let's call it developers leading the project, where we are presented with business goals, or we are able to come up with business goals. That would be the even further step. And then we are coming with, we can just work every day and cleaning the code, improving the code. And when we see, I'm close to this area of this business goal, so by accident, I will also fulfill this business goal. So I hope you liked it. That's the end of my presentation. Let me now present, for those of you who are Rails developers, the offer of Rails Architects Masterclass. This is the 4th edition. We have fantastic numbers this year. So thanks everyone who already joined the Rails Architect Masterclass. It's $799, and that's the last day. Today is the last day to get access to. The next chance will be in 2021. And there is already a community of 150 people before this edition. Now we are actually negotiating with many people, so maybe we'll reach 200. I don't know, maybe even more than that. So we'll see. But the community is growing, and you will get access to lots of senior people and so on. So that's the last chance probably to get the access if you like this idea. And many of the things I was talking today are in the class. So for example, event storming is like very detailedly explained, and all the ideas behind bounded context, how to put departments as your code, how to use events in event-driven architecture, how to use reports as modules, so CQRS and read models. All of this is well explained. So after 12 weeks, you can be very, very fluent in those stuff. All right. So time for if there are any questions. I will now look at at my iPad here. So Tom has added some. So just keep adding questions here. Tom says, I have a possible client staffing firm that has a number of roles and processes. I was thinking I would like to work in the recruiter role and use the software. Yeah, that's a. If I understand your concept here, then work somewhat as a recruiter manager, so I know the business domain before design and coding, which is funny because when I was working as on a publishing software for our client, I immediately tried to use the software from the perspective of Arkansas as publisher, because in a way we are a publisher. We have published a number of our own ebooks. We are also publishing stuff from other people, external people. So all the stuff around, calculating the royalties, calculating stuff like, or talking about rights to specific stuff. It was all like I could try to think in terms of, okay, I can be the user, so I'm a developer of this project, but I'm the user. So Tom, if I understand you right, then you can work as a recruiter manager, so you know the business domain before design and coding. And exactly, I think that's it. And I think that's, if we are in the situation where we can imagine ourselves as users, this is probably the best possible scenario. Pavel, hello, Pavel, the famous Elixir developer. In my experience, business is often very territorial. Any tips how we as developers can gain the trust to let us discuss business too, especially in non-greenfield projects where architectural mistakes are already done? Yeah, this is very difficult. It takes time. Like as I can see, we also enter the non-greenfield projects most of the time, so it's even harder. How we can gain trust? I think that's those like in my experience, it's a combination of those techniques that I showed you. So first, learn in any possible way you can learn about the domain. Then in any possible you can learn how the business people make money on top of this domain, because we are also usually we're confusing the role of the business people with the domain experts. So the business people, they know how to, sometimes it's the same person, but often it's not. So the business people, they know how to make money based on something, and business is actually easy. Buy something cheaper, sell it more, sell it less cheaper, right? And you need to understand those two different separate things, the domain. You need to understand, obviously, what's the current situation. So I didn't mention today about the production metrics, but the more you understand about what is happening, how many people log in every day, how many people use this specific feature, and the more often you are right, it's almost like a game, like an RPG game. You are leveling up, and the business gains your trust. But sometimes you gain trust for many times and that for many days, and then suddenly you make one mistake and you have this coupled model, one model instead of many models, and then the business the trust goes down, and they, for example, want to replace your team with some other team. So we're in a very hard game. It's hard to gain trust, but it's easy to lose the trust. It takes time. So, for example, that's why RKNC, we are only involved in the long-term relationships. So we are with our clients for 8 years, 9 years, 10 years, because that's really the time that we can long-term help them. So during the first 6 months, for example, I'm not even trying to say that, okay, we will come up with new business goals in 6 months in a difficult, complex business situation. That would be too optimistic. So it takes time. Tom is asking, and that's the last question I see. So keep asking if you want some more questions. Sorry, keep asking if you want more answers. Tom is asking, what are your thoughts on mob programming? I have recently, just a moment. There is a book. Actually, it's for free online, remote mob programming. So I like all the ideas which are possible remotely, because as I can see, we are remote. So we've done some mob sessions offline, so really together physically with one computer at RKNC with 4 or 5 people, as I remember, and those are really good coding sessions, surprisingly good. So I like the idea as a concept. I think the current tooling is still not exactly mature for that, but as a concept, I like the idea. I think maybe that's why we could ask the questions, Tom. If you look at this impact mapping idea of thinking together about business goals, so the marketing, salespeople, I like the concept of mob programming, where, let's say physically for now, just to have less imagination how it can work remotely, where we somehow sit in one room, marketing, salespeople, and the developers, almost like sitting in front of the same big screen where we are developing, and the marketing and salespeople, they can do their other job as well, but they can be involved in they can try to hear sometimes, and join the sessions, and then we can work really, really together. I guess that's what the Agile was meant to be from the beginning. If we are talking about the remote environment, that's still possible, like the whole idea of some kind of channels, Zoom channels or Slack channels with their calls, or you can share the screen and so on. Probably should be possible. I'm really happy with the way Miro works, Miro as the virtual whiteboard. If we connect the virtual whiteboard with idea of putting many the whiteboard with different architectural nodes or areas in the Miro, because Miro can create a huge area, then what you can do is you can have you can click, for example, on a screen where some developers work on this area, right? So we can imagine some kind of a combination of mob and Miro, where developers are not really working together at the same time, but when they distribute, you can always enter this specific part of code and see what is the developer doing. And I'm not thinking about, okay, some kind of big brother software where you can watch what is the developer doing just because you don't have trust for them. I mean more like the work should be transparent in as many ways as possible. Doesn't mean that we should watch them really or listen to them. But when we have someone working on one specific department, one specific part of the code, then that should be it should be easy to jump there. So I can imagine, okay, it's maybe not virtual reality, but I can imagine some software supporting this somewhere in the future, probably not now. Shimon, great summary of previous talks, those not technical. Probably expect me to join next masterclass edition. Thank you, Shimon, for the kind words. Yeah, so if you are joining the next masterclass edition, that's great. Any other questions? Hello, Mahfoud. Yeah, so once again, this is the last talk of the Rails Architects Conference. That was our idea to put this together. I hope you liked it. Let us know in the email or somewhere. If you're on our mailing list, thanks for your patience that you survived with the whole emails wave. Let us know if this was cool. That was like something new that we never done before, such an online event. But the numbers of viewers, the numbers of people watching the recordings later, because like during the talk, obviously it's hard to expect everyone to watch. But the numbers are really amazing for us. We didn't expect such big numbers. Number of people viewing the talks, number of people joining our RKNC community via joining the RKNC mailing list, number of people who watch the talks, number of people who joined the masterclass. So this is bigger than our expectations, and we just want to thank you. And Tom, yes, I'm joining. Great overview. Cool. No questions, sir. Okay, so with that, I'm closing the conference. Thanks for everyone for joining. The sale of Rails Architect Masterclass will end in several hours. I don't remember exactly, but like something like 8 hours from now. So this is obviously a screenshot here. Go to railsarchitects.com if you want to buy. And once again, thank you very, very much. That was amazing week for us. We now need some rest, and I hope you have a great week. Thank you. Bye.